It's time for Fishing with Son of a Hillbilly featuring Scott Jackson. Get your rods and your reels out as we're going fishing. Them catfish, crappies, and them dang sunfish ain't gonna catch themselves. On this podcast, you will receive the latest gear reviews, interviews with other anglers, great fishing techniques, and much more. Well, what do you know? It's time for a show. Here's Scott Jackson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Son of a Hillbilly. I'm your host, Scott Jackson, and this is episode number 7. We're doing the Talk About Fishing from a Kayak for the First Time episode. What an adventure. This was the first time. Well, I was talking about in my last episode that I was going to have a chance to get a Sportfisher Kayak, and I did, and I got a really fabulous deal on it from a gentleman off of Craigslist. Sportfisher Kayak is 10 feet long, 36 inches wide, holds 500 pounds, has seating for 3, which I doubt. I bet it's more like 2 adults and maybe a small kid. Depends on how big the adults are. If they're as big as I am, then it's probably just 2 adults, and that's it. But I only want to fish in it myself. So when I took it out for the very first time, it was very stable. I was very impressed. I beat the canoe that I had. I had a 17-foot Old Town canoe, and it was a nice canoe, but it was heavy, very heavy. Heavy compared to this kayak for sure. A lot more difficult for me to handle. And 17 feet, it hung out the back of my truck considerably. Man, I had to use one of those extended beds to keep that canoe up. But now with this new kayak, I can just stick it in there. I don't have to do anything, just strap it down and go. The kayak does have 3 rod holders on it, which is a really nice feature. It has several cup holders. It has a dry storage well. Now, there was some condensation in the dry storage well, but I understand. I don't know how this person kept the kayak. He may have kept it outside and it got rained on or something, and that's where some of the moisture came from. I have read reports where some of the rod holders and other things that are connected to it do leak, so there might be something in the spring or over the winter that I will take a little silicone and hit those seams a bit just to see. I don't want to make it look ugly or anything, but I might undo the screws and squirt a little silicone in there and tighten them down. But it's not a big deal. When I say little, I mean very little condensation, but dry holes are dry holes. That's supposed to keep things dry. But I would put things in plastic anyway, but I didn't use them this first time. All right, so what I did was I took my small tackle box and I put that at the rear seat and strapped it down with some bungees. This kayak does come with a couple of back supports, and a lot of people complain that the back supports don't hold up well. I didn't notice that so much. I'm a short guy, so I have a short torso, and it worked well. I can't complain. My back was fine. I was out there for 2.5, maybe 3 hours, and no issues with that. It has kind of a bumpy or ridgy type area where you put your feet, which runs all the way down each side of the kayak on the inside instead of having adjustable foot holders. So that was kind of interesting too, and I didn't notice anything with it at all. Now, I did not attempt to stand up in the kayak. I just don't have the guts to do that yet, but sitting down, I was perfectly fine, and I was doing some pretty hard casting and very little wiggle out of it. 36 inches of width is quite a bit of width, and it has like a tri-hull design underneath, so it's like a couple of pontoons on the side with a little pontoon in the center, which makes it very, very stable. The front of it, I went ahead and I put a small cooler that I put night crawlers in so I could use night crawlers. I took 3 poles with me, and I also took a dry box to put my phone, my wallet, keys, other stuff like that. In case I took a dive, I wanted everything to be safe and it would float so I wouldn't lose that stuff. I wasn't that worried about the tackle box. Yeah, it's a nice tackle box, but it would probably float as well. The only thing I would probably lose if I ever dumped out of that thing would be my fishing poles. And I could always put some foam. I've seen people put foam around the base of their poles and tie them on with wire ties, and that's a possibility too. So I may do that for some of my kayak fishing for some of my better poles. But this time I took some of my cheaper poles, so if I lost them, these were just garage sale finds, and I'm not worried about it. I had a nice cup holder there. Like I say, there's several cup holders in it in front of the seats, where I went ahead and put my nice large thing of iced tea so I keep myself hydrated while I was out there. And it floated wonderfully. Now, people say that those don't track very well. I can understand what they mean by that. The tracking was a little difficult, but I'm not a kayaker for speed or anything. I'm just wanting to pedal around and do some fishing. And for me, it worked just fine. The only thing that I was surprised about, because I've never used these type of paddles before, were the double paddles that you use for kayaks. Every time I'd take a swipe of the water and lift it up, I'd get rained on. So yes, it is to sit on top of kayak, and you will get damp with this kayak. It's just that simple. The rain will fall down, the water from the paddle will fall upon you and get you a little damp. Now, my legs got damp. The rest of me didn't. I made sure I wore a life preserver. Always wear flotation devices when you're out in a kayak. I don't care how good you are, how good of a swimmer or anything. If that water's cold and you hit it, it could give you cramps, give you hypothermia, all kinds of different things. Wear your flotation protection. Don't be a stupid idiot. Just go. Don't try being some macho dude. Wear that protection. You could get tangled up in your fishing gear, all kinds of different things. You need something that'll give you that extra support. Now, one thing I really like about this kayak, if it ever does flip over, which I doubt, it will float, which is nice. The sit-inside kayaks do have some flotation, and I've seen lots of people rotate those in those rough water type of competitions and things, but this one's going to be a lot easier to climb back into, because once you flip it over and get it back upright again, it's pretty stable, and all you'd have to do is just kind of crawl across it and then, chin yourself in from the opposite side. This kayak does have one handle on one side. Why in the world they didn't put two handles on this thing, I don't know, which makes it a little more difficult to manhandle it around, but not a big deal at all. I was able to pick it up. I grabbed it from that one handle, then I grabbed it from, one of the scuttle holes underneath, and I was able to lift it up very easily. Now, there is a front handle and there is a rear handle, so you could drag it from either direction, from the nose or the tip. And getting into the truck, all I basically did was lift the back end of it up, stick it in, held it with one hand, reached over, grabbed the other handle, and pushed it on in. Very simple. And this thing weighs about 65, 75 pounds, somewhere in that range. They say 65 pounds on the website, but I think it's more like about 70 to 75 pounds. It just depends if you've done any modifications to it or not. This was just the plain unit. Another feature this kayak has is in the back of the kayak, there's a hole there where you can buy an adapter to put a trolling motor onto it. Now, I've heard those adapters are pretty expensive, and I'm not willing to spend that kind of money to put a trolling motor on my kayak. Those paddles work just fine, but I have seen where people take milk crates and modify those with a 2x4, and you put your battery in there in the milk crate. Then you could put your trolling motor on the 2x4, and that'll work just fine. I'm probably going to create something like that in the spring, because I do have two trolling motors, and we'll see if that makes it a little easier for me to get around without getting so wet. And always have the paddles as a backup. You never know what's going to happen. And by throwing that battery in there, of course, I'm throwing extra weight in there on top of it. I'm about 250 pounds right now, and you throw that in there, and it's 500-pound weight. You throw another 100, that makes 350, and then your extra gear. So you always have to take that in consideration when you're out in these kayaks. But with this kayak, I shouldn't have any issues. Now, with this kayak, like I say, I took 3 fishing poles and a dip net with me also on this trip. And those rod holders in the back worked just fine. They kind of put them out at a 45-degree angle towards the rear, which was nice. I'm probably going to create my own rod holders to put on that milk crate creation I'm talking about. In any event, even if I don't put a trolling motor on it, I am going to create a milk crate to put in the back where I can put extra gear in, like my tackle box, like a basket for the fish and stuff like that. This time I just stuck the basket for the fish behind my seat, which worked just fine, because there are the straps that kind of hold the seat back up. There's little places where you connect it. I don't know what you call the things. They're like little metal brackets that you can hook the little eye hooks to, and that holds it in just fine. And putting that behind the seat was great. Where if I needed to put fish in the basket, all I'd have to do is toss that in. Reach around, grab it, toss the basket in the water, and tie it to one of those little brackets. So that would work out very well. So overall, this is a very functional kayak. I highly recommend it to anyone that wants something that's pretty inexpensive. New they sell for $550. I'm like, wow, that's a great price for a kayak, especially with this carrying capacity and the ability to put rods and other stuff into it and the versatility of this. You could use it for duck hunting if you wanted to. You know, they are kind of a green. Some of them come in camo. This one is a dull olive green. But it looks nice. It blends in nicely with the background. We're very quiet and very, very smooth to paddle with. Like I say, it does track off a little bit, but not much. And the one thing that I wish I had brought with me, which I don't have, but I'll have to get one, is an anchor. An anchor would be a nice thing to have. I'm out there fishing and wanting to stay in one location. But this time, I didn't bring one, and I just used the paddles to kind of hold me in place, and it did just fine. I wanted to get out there and try for some northern pike in this lake. I was fishing Thompson Lake with this kayak. Getting the kayak out of the truck was no problem. What I first did was I pulled it out. Let me back up a little bit. I went ahead, drove up to the lake. They have a boat ramp there where you can, trailer boats. I backed up with this truck, pulled the kayak out, and I put it on the ground or on the ramp itself. I did not put it in the water yet. So I wanted to load all my gear into it first, which only took a few minutes. Stick the poles into the holders, attach a seat back. I didn't have the seat back attached earlier, so I had to take a few minutes to adjust it for my back to be able to sit properly. Went ahead and bungeed down my fishing tackle box with a couple of bungee cords. In the front, there's already some bungee straps built into the unit, and that's where I put my dry box at towards the front. And I could reach it fairly easily. When I lean forward, I could grab it and pull it. It has a little strap on it. Put my drink into the cup holder, the fishing net into one of those holders for the rods, because I went ahead and just laid the other ones down in the front of the kayak. Grabbed my paddle, put on my life preserver, and I was off. I went ahead and pushed it to the side to get out and turned it all the way forward and pushed myself off from the actual ramp itself. And I was like in the water floating. I'm like, wow, I don't feel any wiggle whatsoever. And when I did that with the canoe the first time, I was freaked out because that canoe, I felt like I was going to flip over to the side. I was going to fall over. And that's why for it, I originally built these huge pontoons to keep that canoe stable because I was so unnerved in that canoe. But this thing, I didn't feel any of that whatsoever. Kind of felt like when I had one of those little mini two-seated bass boats where I'd put just one seat in the center. Those were very stable. It was like driving on a big sheet of plywood that was 14 inches thick. Those were extremely stable. I actually stood up in those and could stand on the side and do all kinds of stuff, but I was about 100 pounds lighter than I am right now. Those are really good boats too, and I recommend those to anybody that wants something for fishing smaller lakes, or you can actually fish big lakes but stay around the bank and stuff. But with this kayak, I'm sure I can go almost anywhere. After watching those guys on those television shows and seeing them fishing in the ocean, I know this kayak can handle a lot of water. I don't plan on hitting any rough water with it because I'm not that type of guy. But a chop or wind won't bother me at all. It just means a little extra paddling, or I'll be using a trolling motor with it. Now, getting out on the lake for the first time was fun. I've never casted from this kayak. I took a couple of spinning rods, and I took one bait casting rod with me. The idea with the bait casting rod is I was going to fish for northern pike. The lake is crystal clear. I mean, this lake is so clear. I can see down probably 10 feet, 15 feet into the water. So you can see everything. And of course, everything can see me as well. So I started out with a spinner bait, and I would cast out, and I'm in about 10 or 15 feet of water. And I'd count down to about 14 to let it get almost to the bottom. Still a lot of weeds in this lake. It's an extremely weedy lake. But I'm trying to fish on the outside of the weed beds. So I fished for probably about an hour casting with this bait casting rod. I had to, of course, get it adjusted so I get the best cast out of it. But I got to tell you, I didn't feel uncomfortable at all casting with that thing. And I put some pretty hard casts with it. I didn't feel like I was going to fall out of the kayak. I didn't feel I was going to flip over. Excellent. Didn't do well catching any fish, with that rig. But, it was more of a test. This was my maiden voyage and more of a test. So I fished for about 45 minutes or so, and I'm like, okay, I need to try something a little different. I don't want my maiden voyage to go fishless. So my other rods were set up with a sliding bobber and a split shot and ready for worms. So I knew this lake is just full of sunfish. I mean, there's tons and tons of sunfish in this lake. So I thought, well, let me go ahead and switch my technique and see if I can pick up some sunnies. I went ahead and got out the sliding bobber. I set it to about 5 feet deep. You know, it makes it a lot easier to cast when you can pull that bobber all the way up towards you have a real short line to cast. Instead of trying to cast 5 feet of bobber line, I can get quite a bit of distance. So by getting distance, that also tells me that it's further away from the boat and I'm not as likely to spook the fish. So that works out just fine. So I used a small bit of night crawler, and I took that night crawler, I'd say probably about a third of a night crawler, because you don't need a lot when you're fishing for small brim. Yes, if you go with a large night crawler, there's a good chance you might pick up a bass or something, but I didn't think that was going to happen with the weather changes we've been having and everything up here. It was a nice day. It was about 70 degrees out, so it was beautiful, sunny, bright, so there's a lot of sun penetration in the water. And with that clear of a lake, I knew I'd have to go a little deeper or fish in structure, because the weeds and lily pads were definitely dying off. There was very, very few lily pads on top to fish around, but there was a lot of dead lily pad stems that you had to deal with. So I cast it out where I could see where the edge of the weed bank was at, where it dropped off into a little deeper water, but we're talking this lake probably gets 20 feet deep as in the deepest water, maybe 25 feet tops. So I'm fishing probably, 5 feet down. We're fishing in about 8 feet of water. That's what I'll say. So when I cast it out, it didn't take long. I started picking up some sunfish. I picked up over a dozen nice sunfish fishing around, and I'd have to use that paddle to kind of move myself around and keep myself steady because the wind was blowing pretty good that day. Had a bit of a chop on the water. I went ahead and fished towards the edge of the shore where the wind was blowing from. So it was a lot calmer there, which was obviously, for me, unfortunately, was on the opposite side of the lake. But this was nice. This was the first time I was actually able to go all over that lake with that canoe. I had to fight the wind constantly. With those huge pontoons on it, it was really rough to paddle. This thing was nice and easy. It didn't take much effort. Back up in the lake, there's a nice island there. It has a lot of tree stump sticking out of the water and different things under the water where they've been chopped off. So with this kayak, I wanted to be careful just so I wouldn't go flying hard into any of those, so I wouldn't have to worry about any punctures. I didn't have any issues with that whatsoever. And I went into some really, really shallow bays up there just to look around, and I'm talking probably a foot deep, and I did just fine. I went all the way up into the back of the bay, and this is, Thompson Lake in Savage, Minnesota. And the back of the lake was, the rest of it, crystal clear. Didn't see any fish moving, saw a few turtles, but not much. Came back out, fished around that island where I could see where it was a little deeper water because you couldn't see quite to the bottom there. So I fished where it was clear, on the edge of the clear to the dark, and I was definitely picking up plenty of sunfish. So like I said, I caught a bit over a dozen sunfish, all fairly decent size. Put them in the wire basket, and that just kind of float behind me. I let it drag behind me, as I'm floating around. Now, not as I'm paddling. Of course, I pulled it in as I paddled because I don't need that extra drag in the water, and that would definitely throw me off track. But it kind of acted a little bit like an anchor, but not much. It worked out just fine. So you can have a floating basket, you can have a stringer, or whatever type of unit you want to keep your fish in. I mean, if you wanted to put a small cooler to throw fish in, I'm sure that would work just fine. I don't want to take up that much space in my kayak because I eventually want to put my depth finder in there so I can fish in areas where I can use that depth finder. There's some lakes around the area here like Orchard Lake, Crystal Lake, of course, this Thompson Lake, Pryor Lake, and then eventually Lake Minnetonka would be really good. And there's also Spring Lake out here. There's a lot, and these are all, for myself personally, they're all within a half-hour drive. Not a big deal. So all I have to do to go fishing is take that kayak, toss it in the back of the car or back of the truck, strap it down, throw my gear in, and I'm out in less than 15 minutes. I'm ready to go. As long as I've got my live bait, purchased and everything's all set, It's going to be a real simple thing if I want to do some quick emergency fishing. You know how that goes when it just hits the old heart that you have to get out there. Kayak fishing is the way to go for that. It's going to beat a large boat. Now, the large boat's going to beat me in a lot of ways because it's going to go times faster. You're going to have even more stability. You can do standing up. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff in the boat that you can't do in the kayak. Now, there are quite a few people that stand up in their kayaks, and eventually when I get the guts to try it, I'll do that. Hopefully, I'll be about 100 pounds lighter. I'm working on it this spring to see what I can do to drop some of this weight off. And if I do, then I'll have the guts to stand up in my kayak. But for right now, sitting down is just fine. So I'm not going to worry much about really, hard water. When I say hard water, I'm talking about choppy water, hard water fishing conditions with a lot of wind. Now, if it's really crazy windy out, of course I wouldn't go out there. No one wants to go out there in a regular boat if it's like that. But, if there's a little chop on the water or anything, I'm not going to worry about it. The only thing I ever worry about would be other boaters. I've been capsized before and sunk by other boaters in smaller John boats. And I tell you, when a John boat gets full of water, it goes straight to the bottom like a rock. This thing is going to be nice because it's going to float just like my two-man bass boat. If it ever flipped over, and there's no way on earth I think that thing would ever flip over, unless somebody was to hit it directly from the side, it's going to float just the same, so it's its own flotation device. I do plan on doing things like connecting the paddle to the kayak itself with a small cord. I want to put one of those anchor trolleys on the side when I do get the anchor, so I can move it, adjust it to whether I want to anchor to the front or the rear without having to try to get up and do it in the kayak itself. I can just sit in one place and move myself around. That'll be a very nice handy feature. So this kayak should last me for quite a long time. I don't see any reason why I need to go to one of the more expensive kayaks, which is one of my dreams eventually. I'd love to get one of those Hobies or something similar, Jackson kayak or one of those more expensive ones. But for right now, this kayak's going to be a good starter kayak so I can learn all about kayak fishing and all the ins and outs, and I will definitely keep you all abreast with that. So, with this fall fishing for the Northerns, I'm really surprised I didn't pick up any while I was in the lake itself. But then again, the weather, like I say, the weather conditions have been changing quite a bit up here. We've had a few days of warm weather. Now today it's cold, it's dreary. When I say cold, I don't mean super cold. We're talking 50s, so it's colder than the 70s. But with the overcast and dreariness, it's going to make it really cold, and the wind's blowing real hard. So there's no way I'm going out today. I definitely want to get in here and tell you about my adventures that I had already. So this type of day it would be a bank fishing day for me, or if I had a large boat, then I would go out. But in the kayak, if I had the gumption, I could probably go out. But I don't see where I need to do that. I'm going to stick with talking to you folks today. So with that, try kayak fishing. I think anybody that has a large boat, and I definitely plan on getting one, hopefully next year, and get myself a 17-foot regular boat, 16 or 17 would be fabulous. Something that has a larger motor that I could do some pleasure crafting with. My wife would love to go out on the lakes and do some pleasure crafting. But for quick fishing trips, or most fishing trips, this kayak will work out just perfect. And if I don't end up getting it out of the boat next year, say I can't afford it, and I'll never say can't, something comes up that makes it so I don't want to get it, let me put it that way. This boat will work just fine. And with the deal that I got on it, I can't complain. The gentleman said he had never used it, and I could tell that the paddles were in good shape. Yes, the kayak was a bit dirty and dusty, had some cobwebs on it, but I think he had it stored outside or in a shed or something. I do think it had got rained on some. But that doesn't matter. The kayak gets wet anyway. What difference does it make? There's really nothing that was damaged or bad on this kayak. It was in excellent condition. And it's going to be hitting out there. Now, that is the Lifetime Sportfisher Kayak. I've seen them available on Home Depot. I've seen them available at Dick's Sporting Goods. I've seen them available on several other websites. I'm sure if you were to Google Lifetime Sportfisher Kayak, you would get a lot of different places that are selling it. And like I say, it runs around $550. You could probably get on sale for around $500. It just depends. It's still, a very popular model for the low-end kayak fishing guys like myself. I always like to do things as frugally as I can, but get the best equipment I can. And I have to say, this was one of my great finds, and I'm very happy with this Sportfisher Kayak. I do hope to interview some other fishermen here soon, and they could tell you their adventures with kayak fishing. I'm going to be doing a podcast with a gentleman from Texas soon, and he's going to talk about fishing, the heavy rains, and other stuff like that. And that'll be a fun thing to talk about. I'm looking forward to having that adventure with him. Well, folks, I only have one other thing I want to talk about is I have created a fishing course for all you beginner fishermen. And it also has some great tips and stuff for more advanced fishermen. The course is called Learn How to Fish and Fill Your Freezer. And I put it up on a site called Udemy, udemy.com. So you could always go to there, look it up, and see what my course is. I've got it listed up there at a pretty reasonable price. But to anybody listening to this podcast, if you take action and go to my website, www.sonofahillbilly.com, and sign up for my newsletter, I'm going to send you an email which will have the instructions how to go to Udemy and a coupon code so you can get that course for free. I tell you, it's a pretty nice course. I got over 6 hours of content on that course. And in that course, you're going to learn all kinds of fun things. You're going to learn, I have 29 lectures on that course, okay? You're going to learn how to catch fish on a more regular basis. You're going to learn how to read a lake and the best places to fish. You're going to learn how to rig a line for the best live bait presentation. You're going to learn about tackle and what's the best to have. And the techniques in there should increase your all-around fishing success. You're going to learn about structure. You're going to learn about bank fishing, different types of techniques. I cover a lot of stuff in this course. This course is a combination of audio and video. The video will show, I'll actually go in classroom and draw pictures on a board talking about the different structures that are out there. Then I actually go out into live situations on lakes and point out what the structures, some of these structures look like and where you can look around to fish. Now, I'm talking about a bank fisherman. I'm talking about someone maybe with a kayak like myself or a small boat that doesn't have a depth finder, that does not have a book or guide to tell you what the topographic bottom of that lake looks like. This is just how an old hillbilly would have done it years ago. He'd go and look at a lake and say, okay, this looks good. Here's a place I can probably fish. Let's try this. What time of year is it? And blah, blah, blah. I cover all that in my course. And then I also give you some tackle tips, show you some rigs and other things like that. Now, the audio portion of the course is actually me reading my book that I give you in the course itself, the Son of a Hillbilly Guide to Fishing, and I read that book to you. Now, that's quite a few hours of audio, and I do my best on reading it. I'm not the smoothest reader when it comes to reading a book, but at least you get the content. And if you don't want to listen to me jabber for hours, you can always put that on your iPod and listen to it from time to time. You can just read that PDF printed version of the book. And that book goes into depth on a lot of different things. It covers a lot of stuff in my course that I have, they give you in the video part, but it goes beyond that. And I also throw in a few good recipes in that book, too, for catching fish. And there's some good resource guides to tell you about all the different areas or the different conservation departments in all the different states, so you can look those up a lot easier. So go ahead, go to www.sonofahillbilly.com, sign up for my newsletter. I'll email you the coupon code, and you can go to Udemy and get my course for free. Well, folks, till next time, this is Scott, son of a hillbilly, signing off, and we'll talk at you later. You folks have a great day. Get out there and catch some fish. You can't do it sitting in a chair. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Well, thank you for listening today, folks. If you want any more information about fishing, gear reviews, outdoor adventures, photography, you name it, just check out my website, www.sonofahillbilly.com, or drop me an email, sonofahillbilly@gmail.com, or you can actually call and leave me a voicemail message. you can call 320-634-6658. Go ahead and leave your voicemail message. I will answer it on this podcast. So until next time, folks, I hope you're out there catching lots of fish, having lots of fun, and a good time. Yee-haw! Scott, son of a hillbilly, saying goodbye for now. See y'all later.